Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are holstering our six-shooters and riding straight into a legal battle that, well, it really shook the foundations of Hollywood right in the middle of the Second World War. We're looking at a clash between a genuine cultural icon and a massive movie studio. The case is Gene Autry versus Republic Productions, Inc. from 1947.
It's a fascinating case. It really is, because it sits right at this intersection of, contract law, the reality of military service, and just the economic chaos of a global conflict.
Yeah.
It forces us to ask a really fundamental question. How rigid can a contract be when the world it was written in just completely falls apart?
And the stakes here were, they were incredibly high. On one side, you have Gene Autry, the singing cowboy. Yeah. And for anyone who might not know, this guy wasn't just an actor. He was maybe the biggest Western star of the entire era.
An absolute phenomenon.
Right. And on the other side, you've got Republic Productions, the studio that basically built his career. The conflict is just classic. Autry goes off to fight in World War II, serves for years, comes back, and the studio says, great, welcome home. Now, you still owe us those movies from your old contract.
And Autry's response is, absolutely not. That deal is dead.
Exactly.
So, to figure out who's right, we have to unpack three distinct, heavy-hitting legal concepts. First, we've got to distinguish between two doctrines that even lawyers get confused. Frustration of purpose versus impossibility.
Always a tricky one.
Yep.
Okay, what's the second concept?
Second, we have to dig into the nuances of temporary impossibility, specifically that tipping point where a temporary pause on a contract becomes a complete termination. We have to figure out when later becomes never.
And I know there's a really specific kind of an accidental contractual puzzle piece in this case, too.
There is. Our third point is the legal effect of an agreement to agree. Usually that's just a throwaway line in a contract. But here, a single paragraph 24, it changed everything.
So that's our mission.
That's the mission. Does an actor's military service just hit the pause button on his contract, or does it blow the whole thing up?
Okay, let's get into it. We'll start with the first legal weapon that the plaintiff, Gene Autry, tried to use. He argued the doctrine of frustration. Now, this sounds kind of emotional, but it's a very specific legal term.
It is.
What's the general rule for frustration of purpose?
So the general rule, it comes out of a big case called Lloyd v. Murphy, and it has three really strict elements. First, a fortuitous, unexpected event has to supervene. Something happens that nobody planned for.
Like, say, a world war breaking out.
Precisely. Second, that event has to cause basically a total destruction of the expected value of the contract. And third, and this is the key part, performance is still possible, but the reason for the contract is gone.
So, just to be crystal clear, frustration is not the same as saying, I physically can't do this.
Correct. That is the number one mistake people make. Frustration isn't impossibility. Impossibility is, I can't perform because the factory burned down. Frustration is, well, I could still perform, but it's completely pointless now because the value is zero.
I see.
Think of renting a balcony to watch a parade. If the parade gets canceled, you could still sit on the balcony, but the entire purpose is frustrated.
Got it. Okay, let's apply the facts. Gene Autry enlists in the Army in 1942. He claims the war frustrated his contract. He's essentially saying the war destroyed the whole purpose of the agreement. So, did the court buy the frustration argument here?
No, they didn't. And the analysis is, it's pretty straightforward, but it really shows why frustration is so hard to prove. The court said, look, the value of Autry's performance making Western movies wasn't destroyed.
Republic still wanted him.
Republic still wanted him. The public still wanted to see him. The movies would still make money. The consideration, the value exchange, it was all still there. The commercial value survived the war. And on top of that, the court noted that you usually can't claim frustration if the risk, in this case war, was something the parties actually thought about. So because the core reason for the contract was still valid, frustration was out. The focus had to shift to impossibility.
Which brings us to our second big concept, impossibility of performance. Specifically, temporary impossibility, because Autry wasn't gone forever, just for the duration of the war. What's the rule there?
The general rule is in the Restatement of Contracts, Section 462, and it's simple on its face. Temporary impossibility just suspends the duty to perform. That's the starting point. The clock stops.
So if I get sick for a week, I just do the work the next week.
Correct. The contract just waits for you. But, and this is a huge but, there's a massive exception, the duty is discharged, meaning the contract is terminated entirely, if performing after the impossibility is over would impose a substantially greater burden on the person who has to perform.
Substantially greater burden. Okay, that feels like the magic phrase. So let's look at the facts. Autry's gone for years, 42 to 45. Republic says the contract was just on pause, it was suspended. They're thinking, you're back, now you owe us the movies you didn't make.
And that frames the tension perfectly. The legal question becomes, does coming back to a contract written in 1938 but performing it in 1945 count as a substantially greater burden? Or is it just the same job, just a bit later?
We'll see how the court answered that. But first, there's that final doctrinal puzzle we need on the table, the agreement to agree.
Right, and this is usually, a dead end in contract law. The general rule is that an agreement to agree in the future is unenforceable. A court can't force people to agree on something they haven't decided.
Right. Like if I say, I'll sell you my car for a price we'll agree on later, that's not a contract.
Exactly. No meeting of the minds on a key term. However, in this specific context, the court found that a clause like that can act as an abrogation, a cancellation of the existing terms. By saying, we will agree on new terms if this thing happens, the parties are basically admitting the old terms won't work anymore if that event occurs.
Wow, that's a subtle but really powerful distinction. It turns what's usually a meaningless clause into a kind of self-destruct button for the old contract.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, before we jump into the full analysis of the case, I want to make sure we really nail down this idea of substantially greater burden. Can you give us a hypothetical to make this stick?
Absolutely. Let's call this the aged acrobat hypothetical. Imagine a contortionist, 20 years old, signs a contract to do these extreme flexibility stunts, bending in half, fitting into tiny boxes, that sort of thing.
Okay, I can picture it. Young, flexible, basically made of rubber.
Exactly. Now imagine they get drafted and go off to war for 5 years. They come back at age 25, maybe 30. Their joints are stiffer. Maybe they have some combat injuries or just the general wear and tear of living in a trench.
Right. They're not the same rubber band they were at 20.
Not at all. So to force them to perform the same contract written for their 20-year-old body, that's not just a resumption of work. It is physically a different job. It's a significantly heavier burden.
I see.
I mean, it's technically possible they might be able to squeeze into the box, but with a lot of pain. But the burden of doing it has fundamentally changed, and that is the essence of that exception.
That makes perfect sense. It's the same task on paper, but the actual cost to the performer is way, way higher.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take that lens and apply it to the actual cowboys. Let's analyze Gene Autry v. Republic Productions, Inc. First, what are the legally dispositive facts?
Okay, the key facts are these. They sign a contract in 1938. Autry's supposed to make Westerns for a 1-year term plus 4 one-year options. The pay starts at $6,000 a picture and goes up to $14,000.
And were there any specific clauses about war or anything like that?
Yes, and this is crucial. The contract had paragraph 24, which explicitly said that if Autry served in the military, the parties will agree upon their mutual rights and obligations.
There it is.
There it is. There was also a force majeure clause, paragraph 12, but Republic didn't use it. And a breach clause, paragraph 14, which is where Republic argued his enlistment was a voluntary failure to perform.
They argued that joining the Army during World War II was a voluntary breach of contract.
They did. The court.
Yeah.
The court rejected that pretty quickly, saying enlisting in a war is not what they meant by voluntary breach. And finally, the timeline. Autry enlists July 42, discharged July 45. And a key economic fact. The purchasing power of the dollar went down significantly because of wartime inflation.
And what was the core legal issue?
The issue was whether Autry's military service merely suspended the contract, which would require him to finish the movies post-war, or did it terminate the contract entirely because of that agreement to agree clause and the burden of the delayed performance.
So what rule of law did the court apply? Can you state the full black-letter rule and break it down into its testable elements for us?
The court applied a kind of synthesis of contractual modification and temporary impossibility. And the rule really has 2 main elements. Element 1 is contractual intent. Specific provisions, like our paragraph 24, they control over general ones. And an agreement to agree on new terms can abrogate or cancel old ones.
Okay, and the second element?
Element 2 is the burden of resumption. If that delayed performance imposes a substantially greater burden because of the nature of the services or economic shifts, then the duty is discharged.
Thank you. Now for the court's elemental analysis. Let's walk through this step by step. How did the court apply that first element, contractual intent, using paragraph 24?
So the sub-issue there was paragraph 24 just some meaningless agreement to agree? And the court applied the rule that you have to interpret contracts to give effect to what the parties actually intended.
Okay.
The application was fascinating. The court found that paragraph 24 was put in there for a reason to avoid this exact kind of inequity. And the parties actually tried to negotiate. They held conferences in Chicago while Autry was serving, but they couldn't reach a new deal.
So because they tried and failed, does that mean the old contract just snaps back into place?
No, and that's the key conclusion for this element. The court said the very existence of paragraph 24 meant the parties intended to change the contract if a war happened, not just pause it. The provision canceled the old terms, so the failure to agree on new terms did not magically revive the old ones.
So paragraph 24 was like a shield for Autry.
It was. It showed that the 1938 terms were never meant to apply to a post-war world.
Understood. Now what about the second element, the burden of resumption?
So here the sub-issue was. Would performing the 1938 contract in 1945 be a substantially greater burden for Autry? And the court applied that aged acrobat logic we just talked about. They noted Autry was at his peak of popularity and pointed to the physical activity and agility needed for cowboy roles.
Right, because being a cowboy star isn't something you can do forever. It's a physical job.
It's a physical job with a limited career span. Losing 3 years of his prime was a real hardship. But then, and this is critical, the court took judicial notice of the drop in the purchasing power of the dollar. The money he agreed to in 1938 was worth a lot less in 1945.
So he'd be working harder with an older body for money that was worth less.
Precisely. The conclusion was that performing for pre-war wages with post-war inflation on an aging body, yes, that was a substantially greater burden. It fundamentally changed the deal.
And after analyzing all those elements, what was the court's final conclusion?
The Supreme Court of California reversed the trial court. They held that the contract was terminated, not suspended. Gene Autry had no duty to perform the remaining movies. He was free. Free to negotiate a brand new deal or just walk away.
That's a huge win for the artist. So let's bring this all together. If we're looking at a fact pattern like this, what's the framework? How do we break it down?
Okay, we can boil this down to a 4-step diagnostic checklist. Call it the exam framework. Step 1. Check for specific contract language. Is there a clause like paragraph 24? If it says, we will agree later, don't just dismiss it. It might mean the old terms are dead if that event happens.
Good point. Okay, step 2.
Step 2. Classify the excuse. Is it frustration where the value is destroyed? Or is it impossibility where performance is halted? You have to keep them separate. If the commercial value is still there, frustration is going to fail.
And step 3.
Step 3 is analyze voluntariness.
Yeah.
Just remember, the court was crystal clear on this. Enlisting in a war is not a voluntary breach of contract. You can't punish someone for serving their country.
And finally, the big one.
Step 4, the burden shift test. If you decide the impossibility is temporary, you have to ask, does the delay make the performance significantly harder or less valuable? Look for things like inflation, physical ability, changes in the market. If the answer is yes, the contract is discharged. If no, it's just a suspension.
That burden shift test, that really is the key takeaway here. It shows that a contract isn't this static thing frozen in time. It has to breathe and adapt to the reality of the world around it.
That's it.
Next time you're looking at a contract dispute, ask yourself, is the world so different now that the deal isn't really the deal anymore? That wraps up our deep dive into the cowboy, the contract, and the war. Thanks for listening.